What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be talking about how elevated heels can impact your performance and squat movement patterns. We're going to go pretty specific and granular here, so if you are really interested in this topic, hopefully this video scratches the itch that you've been looking for. But this was actually asked on one of my previous videos on training shoes, so if you ever have any questions, feel free to hit me and I'll try to get videos out in a timely manner for your specific topic. But let's dive into why weightlifting shoes, why elevated heels, what does that actually do for our performance? Two key components that I want you to focus on with weightlifting shoes in this video is number one, the outsole. It's very firm, it's designed to create stability at the foot and the ankle joint, and the elevated heel. The elevated heel can vary depending on the weightlifting shoe model you go for, but generally you'll see like 0.5, 0.65, 0.75, and an inch when it comes to heel height. Now, how does that impact performance? So when we elevate the heel, what we are doing is we are assisting our body's ability to feed into a forward knee translation over the toes. So basically we are assisting with our dorsiflexion. We are not increasing dorsiflexion with weightlifting shoes. I think a big misconception is that when you slap on a pair of weightlifting shoes, you're all of a sudden increasing your range of motion with dorsiflexion. That's not necessarily true. We are creating just a slightly more conducive environment to have more forward knee translation. When we have more forward knee translation and a heel that is elevated to sit back on, what ends up happening is we are able to then sit back with a more neutral pelvis and maintain a more upright torso. So when we think about things like front squats, high bar squats, snatches, clean and jerks, if we have trouble hitting the end ranges of motion there and we're having our torso dip forward, or if we just don't have the mobility in our hips and ankles to begin with, a weightlifting shoe is basically designed to increase the overall stability in the lower body and to assist us with those movements. So when we use a pair of weightlifting shoes, we need to be specific in nature with what we're trying to do, but just understand that an elevated heel is going to assist with creating forward knee translation, and the elevated heel is going to support our ability to maintain a more neutral pelvis position while maintaining a more upright torso. All right, so now let's chat on how this elevated heel can impact different ranges of motion at different joints and change overall movement patterns. So 3 things to keep in mind as I rip through these is number one, your overall competency and master of the skill that you're wearing the shoe for will come into play here. Your overall flexibility and mobility levels should be considered. And also your anthropometrics could play into how much forward knee translation, for example, you're getting from an elevated heel. So how long are your shins? How long are your femurs? How is your femur head positioned in your pelvis? These are all things that could factor into what this elevated heel is going to do to your performance. So there really isn't a one size fits all of an elevated heel will always result in this. But to provide you with some context into what research has suggested about elevated heels and squat patterns specifically, is that generally when we elevate the heel, we're gonna see a slight decrease in ankle range of motion. Now that can vary once again based on things like anthropometrics, but oftentimes when we elevate the heel, we're gonna limit some of the ankle range of motion. Now it's gonna be so small that for most people, they're not even gonna realize that it's even happening. But moving up the chain to the knee, we're gonna see more forward knee translation generally. So the longer femurs, the longer shins you have, for example, the more forward knee translation you might actually see, and that's gonna then increase the knee's moment. So when the knee comes further away from the center of mass and further away over the toes, we're gonna have a higher moment, which means that there's gonna be more torque and force placed on that knee. So when we go into extension and that concentric movement pattern, the quads are gonna have to work a bit harder to create knee extension. Now, when it comes to the hips are gonna stay pretty consistent, and for men, it might be a tad bit lower when wearing a pair of weightlifting shoes, because generally men have a bit less mobility at the hips compared to women, whereas women, they're not really gonna experience much of a difference with weightlifting shoes and training shoes based off of the research. But with men, they may experience slightly higher moments at the hip when not wearing weightlifting shoes, because it's a bit harder for men generally to hit greater ranges of motion at the hip when there's not an elevated heel. Now, when it comes to the trunk, oftentimes we're gonna see less degrees of range of motion when wearing an elevated heel, and this speaks to how an elevated heel can help you maintain a more upright torso position. So how can different heel heights then impact all of this? So when we look at what's gonna actually happen when we elevate the heel, it's kind of easy to see that if we elevate the heel more, we are gonna potentially increase more forward translation of the knees over the toes. So the higher heel height, the more potential we are gonna have to create an environment where we're creating forward knee translation. The lower the heel height, the less abilities. Now, how much of a difference are we gonna see between 0.5, 0.65, 0.75, and an inch? It's probably going to be variable based on those first three things I talked about, so I can't give you a definitive there, but I will say that the more you elevate the heel, the more you're gonna create that environment to create forward knee translation. So if you do have a ton of trouble hitting the in-range motion of a squat, then that could be some food for thought when looking at a pair of weightlifting shoes if you are deciding to invest in a pair. But now let's talk about who should wear a pair of weightlifting shoes, because I think that's a pretty often debated topic in the world of strength sports and lifting. So let's dissect that. So three key populations that I think can benefit with an elevated heel, and note that it doesn't have to necessarily be a weightlifting shoe, it could just be an elevated heel with like a plate when doing different things like squats, is number one, the population that wants to focus on their squat movement patterns and how they are positioning themselves. If you are somebody, for example, who has trouble hitting the end ranges of motion and you are focusing on that in your training, then an elevated heel can assist you in doing so. The second population is the athlete and lifter that is focused on a very strength-specific goal for a movement. If you are somebody who, for example, wants to build up their high bar back squat, it makes sense to wear a shoe that's going to assist with that performance aspect versus not. The third population that can benefit with an elevated heel is somebody or any lifter or a beginner that wants to really nail down their squat movement pattern. So if, for example, you have trouble hitting depth without an elevated heel, try elevating your heel to really ingrain the movement patterns you are going for. Really, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer for weightlifting shoes, and anybody who says you don't need them, it's contextual. We need to think about the individual at hand. And also, a lot of older models are like 50 or 60 bucks on Amazon, so simply buying and investing in a pair is not gonna be the hugest investment, plus they're gonna last you for a few years, and if you ever wanna get super granular or specific with your movement patterns, then it's useful to have them. All right, guys, that wraps up this video, long-winded video at that, on how an elevated heel can impact performance and change joint moments and ranges of motion. Hopefully this video made sense because I tried to keep it condensed but also provide enough information to give you enough context on this topic to really understand it. But as always, if I wasn't clear, which I might have not been for some folks, drop it down below and let me know, or ask more questions if you have them. And as always, guys, drop a like to the channel. And as always, guys, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one.